Hi, I'm Jim Gabe, founder of Citizen Arts. I'm very pleased to welcome you to our new podcast series, In Their Words, What Public Officials Do for Us. Not all of them, of course. There's a vast array of local, state, and federal civil servants. We'll present a cross-section of such people doing really interesting, important work. The series was inspired by ignorance. Ours at Citizen Arts. We were discussing secretaries of state, not the presidential cabinet level type, but the ones who have been so much in the news in recent years, the secretaries of state who are elected or appointed in nearly all U.S. states. Do you know what, in general, they do? Sure, certify elections, but that's the tip of the iceberg. Is it important we have a more complete understanding? You bet. We pay their wages, and they do things that affect our lives in many ways. We're honored to start this series with a candid, always informative, sometimes provocative discussion with Steve Hobbs, Secretary of State of the great state of Washington. Some tidbits about Secretary Hobbs. Steve has more than 32 years of service in the U.S. Army. This includes tours of duty in Kosovo and Iraq. He enlisted as a private and is today serving as a lieutenant colonel in the Washington State National Guard. Steve ran for and won a seat in the Washington State Senate in 2007 and was reelected repeatedly, holding that position until 2021, when Governor Jay Inslee appointed him Secretary of State. He replaced Kim Wyman, who'd taken a position in election security in the Biden administration. Secretary Hobbs is the first Democrat to become Washington's Secretary of State since 1960, and as an Asian American, the first person of color ever in that job. Subsequently, Steve ran for and was elected Secretary of State, an office that was established with the adoption of the state constitution in 1889. The Washington Secretary of State is elected every 4 years and is second in the line of succession to the governor. Secretary Hobbs, it's so good to see you again. I don't know if you recall, but the last time we were together, we were on a street in a Seattle suburb, and you were campaigning for re-election to the Washington State Senate. I want to quote something you said to me at the time. I asked what you liked about your district, and you said, well, for one, I like the diversity. I have the opportunity of representing a district that has an even number of Republicans and Democrats. I've got farms, urban centers, cows, and BMWs. I thought that was a great summation. And that's a segue for me to ask, what motivated you to become a public servant?
Sure. I know this sounds a little cheesy, but it just has to do with my background. My family served in the military. I served in the military. We have a strong sense of public service. It's something that drives me is serving my community, my state, my country. And so it's just natural for me after serving to step in the role of public service through elected office. I do still serve in the military to keep myself humble. I always have a boss in the military that I have to report to.
You're being humble, certainly not cheesy, as you would say. I think a lot of us out in the public realm wish that there were more people who expressed what you're saying and then actually lived it. Did you have any idea when you got into politics what it required of you?
Not really. So the challenges of representing a district that's very diverse, even numbers of Republicans and Democrats, is a swing district. Every campaign was a knife fight. But the good thing is coming from the military, especially in a situation where I served in two tours overseas and in combat zones, is that the stress I was prepared for. And there's a lot of stressors when you represent a swing district.
I'm a former military man. One thing that has disturbed me about politics in, let's say, the last few decades is that somebody with that kind of experience seems to have less of a grip on the public than it used to. I remember when I was growing up and having some initial understandings about politics that if somebody had a military background, that was honored. And that was something to respect. I'm thinking of some of the recent incidents regarding military people, maybe John McCain and our former president. And I'm wondering how much being a military man affected your campaigning, how people responded to you.
In my first race for state senate, the party itself at the time was not sympathetic to my military background. So it's a rough primary.
You said the party. First of all, which party are you talking about and why?
I'm a proud Democrat.
You're a proud Democrat. Okay. Yeah. But even if you were as a proud Democrat and a military man, they were not accepting? There was not interest in that? Why?
Well, you got to understand, it's 2006. So it was the Iraq War was pretty intense on people's minds at the time. And the way the party structure was here in Washington State, they were not as sympathetic locally for me, though the leadership at the kind of the state level was supportive. And they felt like, well, since the war is so unpopular, then maybe perhaps I'll be tied to that. But as I let the local party folks know, it's like, look, I know my local community, grew up here. I think they would be more than welcoming of somebody like me, and of course demonstrated that in a strong showing in the primary, and then winning the general election. You know, it all depends on your constituency on whether or not the military background matters or not. I will tell you, once you are in office, it does help a lot, especially at the executive level, where you take the military background and you apply it to an organization. In the National Guard, I was called up to do COVID response operations for almost 2 years.
My goodness.
I commanded a joint task force of 750 soldiers where we did support operations in Western Washington. Unfortunately, there's folks out there that seem to think that people come from the military it's all about like Full Metal Jacket, right? We're all these mean people that just direct folks, and we don't care about opinions or advice. But that's not true. The military has evolved quite a bit, and in fact, the schools that I go to for leadership in the military, we actually go over Harvard Business School's case studies on how to run an organization. So the military has evolved quite a bit over the last 20, 30 years.
I came out of Vietnam, and some of the most honorable, impressive people I have ever met, I've met on active duty. And I'm wondering if that has been your experience as well.
Well, absolutely. I think you and I are a little biased because we came from that. We were both active duty and coming from a time of war. I will say that, the military experience I had serving as an intelligence analyst in the NSA has prepared me for this role, Secretary of State, because the cybersecurity threat, the misinformation threat from overseas actors, and my role as an infantry officer, where I actually took an active role in the first free and fair elections of both Kosovo and Iraq.
Shortly after we met with you, we spoke to a gentleman who wanted to run for office in Virginia. And he said it was such a daunting task because the first thing they put in front of me, and when I say they, it was the party, and he was, in his case, he was a Republican, was money. How much do you have, and where are you going to get the rest of it? You're going to need a huge amount of money. And he was going to be running for a state position, same as yours. And they essentially told him it was a fruitless effort. Well, what were you told, and why didn't it, if you were told that it was going to be a daunting effort, why didn't it daunt you?
The thing is, I kind of, even though I was pressured to drop out of the race, my first election, I was very tied to my community, unlike the opponents that I had, because I grew up in a small town of Lake Stevens. I knew the community. The community is actually, the town itself is rather conservative, but they trusted me because I came from the community. I went from kindergarten all the way to high school, went to the local community college and at the University of Washington. So those ties to the community is what drove me and drove the election to success.
You are an Asian American. Was that an obstacle?
For me, it was not an obstacle. It might have been a benefit, especially running the primary at the time. But growing up as an Asian American was certainly had lots of challenges where I remember a time where people spray painted Jap right on the road, right outside my house. I remember getting beat up multiple times. I remember it was really rough, especially growing up in the 70s and early 80s. And I remember my mom being harassed quite a bit where we lived and where she worked. She was telling me how people would harass her saying, well, you need to speak better English and things like that. So yeah, it was rough at times. And
you persevered. You became a politician. You succeeded. And then you became something that I don't think I'm overstating that, a position that not too long ago most people never thought about, but now is centerpiece of everybody's thoughts about politics, Secretary of State. How did that position register for you before the governor approached and asked if you were interested in taking the position?
Well, it started being interesting after what happened with the previous president and in January 6th and the rise of actors trying to disrupt our country through misinformation, disinformation, and cyber attacks. But you're absolutely right. I mean, but 10, 20 years ago, this was kind of a boring office. And to be honest with you, a lot of people, I know because being in state government for such a long time, I knew that it was an elected position. You'd be surprised how many people out there, they don't realize that the secretaries of state in most states is an elected position.
I want to reinforce what you said about most people don't understand it's an elected position. 47 states have a secretary of state. There are 35 states in which it is an elected position. And the other states, it's an appointed position. And I was absolutely, I guess flabbergasted is the word, when I read through your responsibilities. We're going to get into some of them in a moment. I didn't realize that secretaries of state were at the heart of so many things that affect our lives beyond elections.
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that because, I got 350 or so employees and 22 of them work in elections. And I got these great other functions of our office, like the library, like legacy, our history. We put out books, our corporations and charities, the Address Confidentially program, which we help those that suffer from domestic violence. So thank you very much for mentioning that.
Let's talk about some of those non-election responsibilities. Let's isolate the 2 or 3 that occupy you the most.
I would say corporations and charities can occupy a lot of my time because it is the largest portion in terms of employee strength of the office.
What is that?
So basically, when you form a corporation or a charity or nonprofit, you have to file through the Secretary of State's office, and we keep track of that. But libraries and history have been occupying some of my time only because I want to do more with those functions of state government. For example, our state owns the libraries in all of our prisons and our state hospitals. And we are now, for the first time, we didn't do it in the past, we now have a library in our youth detention facilities, which we didn't have, which is absolutely amazing. And what we're trying to do in the office is go, what can we do more than just checking out books and movies? Let's look at rehabilitation. Let's look at the possibility of teaching these inmates, preparing them for when they get released. 6 months before release, let's do some civics classes. And let's have the inmates tell their story. Let's hear from them, maybe what happened, what got them behind bars, or what happens in these prisons.
So libraries have also been sources of controversy. Does that extend to your overview of libraries in the state?
Oh, yeah. We had an incident where, and your listeners might be familiar with this, is that you've got these citizens groups that are attempting to censor libraries, like pull books from libraries. And so there was a moment where they approached a library board, and our state librarian went out there to talk about that. And we haven't heard anything much since then, but we're ready to combat and push back on that. There are some of the libraries that are in their prisons. We don't call them wardens here; we call them superintendents. They can tell us not to have certain books. And each prison is a little different, so we're trying to get them to back off a little bit on that. I believe, I'm a firm believer they have access to to most forms of literature. The other thing that we've been working on is we're building a new library and archives building. We have all the state's documents, including the state constitution. I don't know why we have this, but we have a letter from Cortez from the 1400s. I don't know how we got that, but we have all these old records that I would like to take around the state and not have them in a dark room. And so we're looking at doing a traveling archive show, a history show, if you will, and go to visit the different schools around the state to talk to the young people about the rich history of the state of Washington.
You've obviously been discovering things since you've gotten into office. Beyond Cortez, is there anything else that you said, my goodness gracious, why doesn't everybody know about that?
We've got coming up the 10th anniversary of marriage equality in the state of Washington. And what's great about that is I got to vote on that historic bill. Not only are we putting out a book, but what we're trying to do is put together this podcast where we bring in historical figures that took part in the fight for marriage equality. After that, we're doing a very important court decision that allowed our tribes access to fisheries to get their fair share of catches. We're going to highlight about the tribal figures that took part in this fight. And there's other opportunities out there that we can do.
Speaking about tribal history and culture and people of very different perspectives, backgrounds, points of view. In our travels in Washington, we certainly know, as in many other states, there may be centers more cosmopolitan, if you will, in outlook, and then there are more rural areas where maybe traditional points of view prevail. And I remember in Yakima, Washington, okay? Did I pronounce that correctly?
You're close. It's Yakima, but yeah, that's good.
Yakima. In Yakima, people saying, well, you got those crazy liberals in Seattle and along the coast, and they don't know. I don't have a clue who we are and what's going on here. How do you bridge that?
Very carefully. I mean, look, I survived in a swing district for about 15 years. So luckily, I've built up a lot of trust amongst those on the other side of the aisle. I think if we put out books that talk about our rich history, I think we'll be fine because we're talking about the facts. Will there be people upset about certain things like the marriage equality bill that we're celebrating marriage equality? Yes. But you know what? Sometimes we just have to do it because it's the right thing to do. I think for the most part, people feel that the rights of the LGBTQ community should be respected.
Secretary Hobbs, let's step into what is, if not your primary function, certainly the one that gets the most publicity, and that is elections. And let's talk about what your primary responsibilities are when it comes to elections.
Sure. The chief role of the Secretary of State's office is that we certify the elections of our 39 counties. We assist our 39 counties. They do the lion's share of the work. We do the training for them. We provide them assistance with cybersecurity, and we combat misinformation. And sometimes in our role as Secretary of State, because some of these counties are so small, they have a staff of like 1 or 2 people. Sometimes we do some of their communications for them. The combating of misinformation, disinformation, and our cybersecurity has been has been taking a bigger role in the last couple of years for obvious reasons that we all know about.
Maybe obvious to some of our listeners, but let's spell it out. When we talk about disinformation and misinformation,
Yeah.
what are we getting at?
So basically, let me run down what happened last year, just with elections.
The midterm elections.
Yes. So we had a situation where a few months where I'm into office, we saw an email that was being generated at the grassroots level. It was with the Republican Party talking about something called an Albert sensor. Now, this device connects to the network, and what it does is it warns you when a large amount of data is coming from or to a suspicious IP address. So, for example, if you connect this sensor to a county system, let's say in a rural county, and a whole bunch of data is coming from or to a Russian IP address, that's pretty suspicious. So this device, which is recommended by Homeland Security to governments and sometimes businesses that have sensitive information, this device is attached. And so this email said that this Albert sensor is tied to George Soros. Now, to your listeners out there, you're thinking, that sounds absolutely ridiculous that people would believe it. By the way, it's not true. It's not tied to George Soros. And you would think, oh, well, that's easily dismissed, but it wasn't. This grassroots movement grew to remove these Albert sensors to the point where a county with all three of their commissioners voted to remove the Albert sensor based upon that misinformation. So the FBI, in fact, Kim Wyman, the former Secretary of State here in the state of Washington, now works under the Biden administration under CISA, which Cyber Security Infrastructure Security Agency. She came in on the Zoom meeting where we had all 39 county auditors. We had the FBI. We even had a member of the National Guard that runs the cybersecurity team here in the state, urging our counties to keep this sensor on. A couple of weeks later, we get notified by U.S. Cyber Command through the general of the National Guard telling us that there were 6 Russian IP addresses that state and local governments were transmitting data to. They gave us the IP addresses so that we could warn all the counties out there, hey, look, be careful. These 6 IP addresses are receiving data. Make sure you're not sending data to them inadvertently. Back before I took office, Kim Wyman had briefed me and said that they had found malicious programming or software in the system they think might have been Russian in origin. Luckily, nothing happened. Sometimes malicious actors put something in there to be a sensor. You trigger it and chaos happens, So we had that going on. And then misinformation that was happening, more misinformation where we had folks going door to door, trying to find what we call these ghost voters, and they're not ghost voters. A situation happened in my house. So my oldest boy was deployed to Ukraine. On the voter rolls, it shows, Gavin Hobbs living at my house, but he wasn't living at my house, right? Because he was deployed. So these people going to door, which, by the way, this happened in other states too, funded by the Mike Pillow guy. And our state was a little different. Another person was running it. And they were trying to say, look, look at this fraud. These people who don't live in your home are receiving ballots. Well, guess what? That's because they're serving overseas or they're a college student, and that's why they don't live here. But they were trying to say there was some kind of fraud. We had one county auditor get the list of these so-called ghost voters from these people doorbelling. They're called the Voter Research Project. I think that's the name of the group. And all of the 2,000 names they got, pretty much all of them were either overseas voters, serving the military, or their college kids. So we had to deal with that.
What's the line between misinformation and disinformation?
We lump it all together because it makes it easier when you're talking to folks, at the NSA, they categorize it into different categories. But I think for the sake of here, we just call it misinformation.
So it was always my understanding that misinformation was something that was false, but people believed it. And disinformation was knowledgeable twisting of facts to create an untruth.
Yeah, and there's malinformation too. But the problem is when you do that, it confuses people. So I'm talking to people, I just say misinformation.
Well, when we were talking about the Russians and the possible use of data or the purposes of constructing malware, is that where the area you would define as cybersecurity?
Yes. When I got into office, we beefed up our cybersecurity team. I hired an additional person to take on the role of coordinating all that. We have a lot of meetings with Homeland Security and the FBI and CISA to ensure that our systems are protecting our own systems, but also helping protect the 39 county auditors.
Are your efforts in cybersecurity coordinated with other states, so you know what's going on? You're right up to date with the latest efforts to undermine, let's say, the digital platforms for elections and to put false information out there?
It is very coordinated. When you become Secretary of State in any state, you are offered a security clearance. I already had one because I've been in the military. So it's coordinated at the federal level, and then we try to coordinate with our 39 counties. And the other secretaries of state do that too. They coordinate with their sometimes they call them county clerks, but they coordinate with the organizations that run the elections at the local level.
This brings to mind, I was in an Eastern European country not so long ago and was talking to a gentleman who was in intelligence and worked in cybersecurity. And he said the biggest threat to his country, though it would appear to be overt military action coming from, let's say, Russia, was actually cybersecurity threats coming from Russia. He said it was incessant and very potent. And he said, I know you're experiencing some of this in the States. You're going to see a lot more of it because the bang for the buck is very high for Russia to do something like that, as opposed to trying to get into overt military action, though, of course, we've seen differently in Ukraine. And I'm wondering, what's their end game? What's the intent here?
Well, the intent of these overseas actors, our adversaries like Russia, is to cause disruption. And affecting our elections causes major disruption. You have Republicans and Democrats out after each other, and they're not concentrating on the bigger threat, which is the adversary that's trying to disrupt us. And it's not just elections, but they're going to try to disrupt our economy. And I'm sure you've seen all attempts at doing that. And they're good at it. They have whole agencies designed to scour social media and to take an instance of even truth, twist it, create a false website and say, oh, this is a valid news agency, and then pepper back into the area these false narratives to cause chaos. And we have to up our game here to counter that.
Is this a truly divisive topic politically, or is there a coalescing of views that this is a true danger? Is there a center that's united? It's sort of non-political, that this is something that has to be dealt with?
Yes, I think because of the past couple of years of what we've seen, I work with Republicans here in the legislature, and I work with Democrats. There is a core group of individuals that have come together and said, this is a real threat, and we have to do something about it. And so they're helping me here at the state level to combat that threat.
Did you have, or do you have, an active group of election deniers in the state? People who simply refuse to accept what you, as Secretary of State, might certify as election results?
We do, actually. Luckily, they're a small group, but they're very loud. And, we have to constantly try to educate voters on both sides of the aisle, which we did during 2022 with the Vote with Confidence campaign. We can, in the past, secretaries of state will say, hey, don't forget to vote. Don't forget to turn in your ballot or go to the polling places if you're a polling state. And that was the extent of it. Now we got to talk about what happens to your ballot when it gets in the mail. We got to talk about the tabulation machines. We got to talk about how the tabulation machines are not connected to the internet, despite what people say. So we have to tell more of the story about what goes behind the scenes and how your ballot is counted.
This was such a major issue surrounding secretaries of state. I just want to give our audience some figures. In the last election, that was 2022, there were 37 election denier candidates running in primaries for Secretary of State. More than 80%, or that's 22, of primaries for Secretary of State featured an election denier. Out of 13 election deniers that made it to the general election, 3 won their races for Secretary of State. So it doesn't seem like it's a particularly potent platform to run on.
In my race, there was election deniers. I think it's a huge threat if any of them makes it through. The ERIC system, the Election Registration Information Center, helps us combating, election fraud or mistakes in the system. For example, if you were to move to another state and you registered there, ERIC lets us know. But this system lets us know that if somebody passes away. And remember when I told you the story about the Albert Censor, this grassroots effort about tying the Albert Censor to George Soros? Well, guess what? The same misinformation campaigns launched against ERIC saying ERIC is tied to George Soros. I guess he's everywhere. And so my understanding, I know Louisiana, their Secretary of State decided, well, we're going to pull out of ERIC. We're going to just step back. Why would you do that? If you're telling your voters that you're trying to combat fraud, wouldn't you want to have a system that helps you do that? And now Alabama decided to do that just recently with their new Secretary of State.
This denialism, where is it coming from? Would they deny elections if their guy or gal was winning? Is it nihilism? They want to bring down the system, or is it targeted at views of specific voters?
Well, I will tell you, at this particular moment in time, it is the far right that's mostly doing this. We're in a dangerous time because of social media, because of overseas actors that want to purposely bring down our government, cause disruption, that are helping generate and fan the flames.
This environment of misinformation, of denialism, it has soiled the playing field, if you will. It's not going to go away because of social media. It's too easy to do, to put stuff out there, to put crap out there and muck up the system. Am I incorrect in saying that this is going to be continuing?
Here's the thing. Secretaries of State were just telling the public, hey, look, this is how ballots are being counted. It's something that we've always taken kind of for granted. The election systems, especially in our state, are secure. They're transparent. Now we just got to let people know about it. Every state allows election observers in. A lot of people don't know about that. So we got to tell people that story, right? And while we're doing it, I know in our state, we're going to engage the young people. We're talking about trying to create a mobile game app where they're voting for maybe fantasy characters in a fantasy-like setting. And then we throw in some civics questions and they're earning points. They're on a leaderboard. So they're having fun, but guess what? We're teaching them civics, right? We're teaching the election process before they become a voter. We always had an election system with high integrity, but we're going to make sure people understand that we have a good, solid system.
So how engaged are you with school systems when it comes to education about civics? Because civics is one of those areas that in recent decades has sort of been pushed to the side.
Well, each state is different. In our state, we just recently added civics in the classroom. We are going to do our part here in the Secretary of State's office. Like I said, we're going to try to create this game app. We're also going into the conventions like PAX West. This is a large video game conference that we have here in Washington State, and we engage with them. And we also have a Temperance Day and Good Citizenship Day where we engage young people about the election process and about government in general. So we're really upping our game here in Washington State. I'm sure other secretaries of state are doing it because we talked to them. There's a National Association of Secretaries of State. We're all meeting in February in D.C., and these are the subjects that we'll be talking about.
What has being Secretary Hobbs taught you about Secretary Hobbs?
Well, I guess it's taught me that I really love being a public official, being an elected official. I love being in the fight for defending our democracy.
And speaking of the fight, you were appointed to the office, as noted by Governor Inslee, and you're up for election in 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Are you running?
I think I am. I love my job. So I haven't filed my paperwork because I don't have to do that till later on. And I won election just recently for my appointment. Because the way it works in Washington State is if somebody leaves in the middle of their term, the statewide office, the governor appoints, and there's an immediate special election. And so I ran for that special election and won. So yeah, I'm up in 2 years.
I must say we were so impressed when we met you out in the street campaigning.
Yes. Going door to door. There's doorbelling in.
Am I going out there too far by asking, when you think about the future, what might additionally be out there for Secretary Hobbs?
Oh, I don't know. I love my job now. Who knows?
You have a knack for having people from different points of view keen to you. I don't mean to sound obvious, but that's really what we need these days. That's really where it's got to be if this country is going to hold together. It's people like you, for sure.
Wow, you're making me blush. Thank you very much. I owe it to the fact that just probably my upbringing, the fact that I represented a swing district, and now that as Secretary of State, you have to work with both sides. You have to gain trust of both Republicans and Democrats in our system of democracy. So that's just something I've always done and always believed in. I think I told you back then I consider myself a radical moderate, an extreme centrist. That's who I am.
Well, you are to us the height of what public service and dedication means. You are really the best of what our country produces. And we thank you and we wish you all the very, very best.
Well, thank you very much. And I hope when you get a chance to come to Washington State, come by the office and say hi.
We certainly will do that. And there you have it, dear listeners. The first episode in our Citizen Arts series, In Their Words, What Public Officials Do for Us. We hope you found this chat with Secretary of State Steve Hobbs enlightening, and you'll join us for upcoming episodes with the likes of judges, mayors, state reps, tax collectors, and many more. At Citizen Arts, we're dedicated to presenting information, analysis, and constructive opinion about matters of civic importance. We're a not-for-profit 501c3 organization. Your interest in and support of our work are greatly appreciated. On behalf of Secretary Hobbs and my Citizen Arts colleagues, a heartfelt thanks for lending an ear. We invite you to join the conversation. Please visit citizenartscreative.org and let us know what you think. And always, please, stay healthy in mind and body, wealthy in goodwill, and wise in action.